you everyone for joining us. Yep. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Really excited to present this panel to you today. Few housekeeping items before we start. My name is Jim Knox. I'm Managing Director at Aon. I'm also a proud member of the Boston Blockchain Association. I'm on the board of directors. A couple of things to note before we start. This session will be recorded today, so everyone be aware of that. If you do have questions, please feel free to drop them in the question and answer box. So the event today, the topic of today, revolutionary health, AI, blockchain, and data in healthcare and life sciences. Really, really interesting topic. We're going to hear, frankly, kind of a bit of the future, where AI is taking us as regards healthcare and life science, biopharma. We have panelists here, Jordan and the other panelists. They will introduce themselves in a few moments. Next slide, please. So the vision, what is the vision of the Blockchain Association, Boston Blockchain Association? We promote the adoption and growth of blockchain technology by connecting innovators, thought leaders, institutions, and market leaders together through education, networking, and collaboration. What is the mission? Mission is simple. The mission of the BBA is to foster a thriving community around blockchain and related technologies by one, supporting educational programs like today. Number two, inspiring innovation. We just completed a hackathon last weekend, and some of the innovation and ideas put forth by some of these students was absolutely amazing. Three, empowering the ecosystem, participants with valuable resources and insights. We regularly have speakers that are regulators in the space, people from Capitol Hill, thought leaders. So it's a great community that we bring together. Next slide. We would not be able to do this without our sponsors. We're very, very appreciative of our sponsors. Just a quick note for some of the sponsors. Our platinum sponsor, Massachusetts Technology Collaborative. Gold sponsors, Aon, that's myself, Fidelity Center for Applied Technology, Fidelity Digital Assets, Fidelity Investments, Ripple, Silver, Algorand Foundation, Amber Data, and we have some new sponsors, one of which is KPMG, Ropes and Gray, another new sponsor staying with crypto, business partners, BlockHealth, Crypto Recruiters, new sponsor, Israel David, Media Shower and Solana, startup, DVLP Developed Medicines, FYEO, Influx, Cadena, True Tickets, Community, Federal Reserve of Bank of Boston, FinTech Woman, NEHCH, Suffolk University, and the TAB Group. So the BBA, the Boston Blockchain Association, it's a volunteer group. So, we're always looking for really good quality corporate members. Please feel free to reach out to us. We also welcome very much individual members. So love to have individual members join. We have many of them. And volunteer. We have a really good dedicated volunteer force. We're always looking for more people to help with us. So please feel free to volunteer and reach out to us for that. Okay. Then I'll leave off to Jordan. Jordan, please introduce yourself and the panelists, and we'll get started.
Great. Thanks, Jim. Great to be here and excited for this conversation. I know we have only an hour, but we probably have enough content for a week here. So we're going to get into some of the most interesting pieces of technology and future of what's impacting not only the AI space, the healthcare space, the digital ecosystem. All this we're going to weave together and talk about what the future looks like. So I've been at Nasdaq here leading our healthcare technology practice for over 21 years, and I get to work with a lot of these companies that are private, and they're kind of, in real life practitioners of this technology. So I'm really excited for today's conversation. We have really great esteemed panel who are subject matter experts and can bring perspective on all of these different areas and topics. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brigitte and have you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background.
Well, hello, everyone. Thanks so much, Jordan. And thanks to the organizing group for putting this on. My name's Brigitte Piniewski. I'm a physician trained in primary care and obstetrics, spent the first part of my career doing a lot of deliveries, then moved into the C-suite as chief medical officer for a large reference lab in the Pacific Northwest. We worked with Intel, Qualcomm, and other technology companies through the Continua Health Alliance to optimize health outcomes across populations, and had collaborations with a number of academic universities in order to produce NIH studies. Since that time, I worked with investor groups, helping with education in Web3 and and blockchain. Investors wouldn't invest unless they understood the technology. And so we set up education programs for investors. And that's when I really got excited about this space and the potential for true transformation in healthcare. And more recently, I just released a book called Wealth Care: Demystifying Web3 and the Rise of Personal Data Economies, which speaks to the medical imperative that we, get working with these technologies quickly and effectively in order to achieve the true revolutionary health that we're talking about today. Thanks so much. Let me move it on to Dan. Want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks. My name's Daniel Faissol. I lead a program at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory on computational design of biologics. So we're aiming to develop the technologies, bringing together machine learning, supercomputer simulation, optimization, and high throughput experimental screening to accelerate the design and discovery of antibodies and proteins. I'm here speaking not on behalf of Lawrence Livermore, but just on my own. Great to be here. Thanks for having me. Over to
Hi,
Jason.
thanks. Hey, Dan, good to see you. So I'm Jason Paragas. I'm the CEO and founder of Develop Medicines. I got into the space. I started my career as a virologist, wearing one of those spacesuits, running around, working with Ebola, smallpox, these sorts of things, demilitarizing the Soviet bioweapons program. But very quickly transitioned over to innovation in the healthcare, life sciences, and technology space, and more important for this conversation, led innovation at Lawrence Livermore, and Dan was one of the scientist engineers I worked with, where we really looked at that opportunity space of supercomputing, AI, healthcare problems, life science problems. What does that space look like? And, the hard work that Dan did and others really convinced me that the future of life sciences was going to be through AI. And so I jumped over, joined a startup at Flagship, and then went on to found a couple of companies until I founded Develop Medicines, which is really the intersection of AI, blockchain, and solving some of the key problems that we have in getting more medicines to patients.
Excellent. So let's just dive into this right now. I'll give it to Jason and Dan to talk first. What are you seeing that are some of the most interesting, exciting AI-based technologies for therapeutic design currently, but then also what do you think is going to what will that evolve into as well?
Well, let me give it a high level, and then Dan can give you the reality.
Okay.
I'm really excited about what we see with first language models. We're a language model native company, which in many ways is different than AI. But where I see the biggest technology is the next version of language models, which has been logic. So, applying the ability of language models to, in many ways, think. So they call them the reasoning models. And what we see is kind of the next step after that is AGI, or artificial general intelligence. And so the power that has when you put it into the right stack or software stack, is absolutely transformative of how we think about medicine, how we think about the costs that'll bring these drugs to market. That to me is as significant for life sciences as the molecular biology revolution. This is really transforming the industry in a way we're never going back.
Yeah, I'll add to that. An excellent point, Jason. I'll say that with the molecular biology revolution and supercomputing and AI, all three coming together, have basically made molecular design be at an inflection point in the field right now, where it's just taking off like it never has. We're going to go from the field moving along very incrementally and slowly to transformative capabilities. We'll be able to design, I think in the next year or two, we'll finally be seeing some de novo protein design capabilities where we can design therapeutics that were unreachable before with previous methods. I think the next step, but those are very bespoke capabilities for protein design. I think the next step would be what Jason's talking about, which is reasoning models to be able to do that more generally and not rely on a very bespoke model for protein design. And that'll be incredibly exciting. I think that's the next step, but I think it's a little bit further out now.
That's fascinating. I mean, I'm already starting to think of all the implications that could have in the future drug development timeline and how that's going to be impacted. So I couldn't agree with you more too. I think that you're seeing it every day, and startups that are going out to look for molecules and accelerating the process from the wet lab. It's just, and the costs, right? It's more efficient. So that's already an immediate impact today, but it sounds like we're in the first or second inning.
Yeah.
So Brigitte, what are you seeing in your line from AI and healthcare? I know you have a little different perspective, but I'd love to see how it's impacting your line of business.
Yeah, so just from the clinical arena, we have to reckon with the fact that AI inherited some suboptimal resources on which to work. So think of the EMR, the electronic medical record, that isn't really holding a lot of health data. It carries some disease management and billing data. And think of it as imagining to build a self-driving car, but only using accident data, and only accident data for which an insurance claim has been made. So that's a tough data set in order to understand the ebb and flow of health across populations. And speaking of populations, we do study populations, which gives us, yields us what an average outcome might look like. But yet none of us want an average outcome. We're all looking for the best outcome. And at the end of the day, that information is not available using study populations. And then also, we think of medical literature as holding deep scientific truth. But in fact, the medical literature, of course, we tend not to publish the negative studies. So we're missing that chunk of the data. And then the studies that we do publish, a lot of them are not reproducible, which again makes it hard for AI to learn the truth. And fundamentally also, I should add that things like misdiagnosis in terms of EMR data, though there's no neon signs around that for AI to understand. So we have this situation where AI actually is using an industry's resources that was never built for the type of precision that AI can deliver today. And we're hoping that we can correct that, given the fact that now we have these amazing tools, Web3 and blockchain, allowing us to provide a future whereby AI would have access to ground truths. Think of it as a fire hose of ground truths coming from the population itself, where lived experiences are converted to digital assets, and these digital assets can participate in diverse marketplaces and create an opportunity for each of us to have personally relevant in health intelligence, something that we co-produce with each other, such that we can truly, take advantage, get that value unlock for this precision instrument that's available to us today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we're going to drill down deeper on that because that's a very interesting topic that we can spend a lot of time on. But before we think about some of those details, I guess my question is, I'm going to try to answer one of the questions from that came in at the same time. Knowing that there's challenges and that we're not all the way through the process, what are some of the only technical obstacles, but also what are some of the industry regulatory obstacles that we see kind of holding? Is there anything holding us back technically, and anything holding us back from a regulatory side as well? And how will that evolve over the next couple of years?
Well, I think the regulatory issue is exactly the same as you see in the financial services industry. If we start thinking about this healthcare, life sciences, drugs, whatever, these knowledge products as what they are, if you look at a manuscript, paper in Science, that probably costs, $3 or $4 million to get to. And, the journals charge you 10 grand to publish it. But, that science that went behind it, that's knowledge that contributes to, $1 billion product. And so those are really digital assets. Those are real world assets. They're knowledge assets. It's just a different form of currency. And having a way, a regulatory framework that we can trade, accumulate, sell, would transform the industry. I think getting out of these old funding models that we're in, paying people for what they develop, paying people for what they think, paying models for what they produce in a small way, not a 6-year project way, will definitely accelerate the number of medicines and improve the quality of care. And kind of what Brigitte was talking about, all of us are part of a giant clinical trial, and we should be paid for our medical experience that we share to industry in the same way. So, because it does benefit us in the long run. But so that would be my top thing. I think around technology, it's at the end of the day, unfortunately, it's data access. We're still in an old data regime. If we could be as good as the Weather Service, believe it or not, I think if you think about health data, life sciences data, like the Weather Service thinks about weather data, we would be light years ahead.
Yeah, and speaking about weather, I always use that example of, the weather says it's raining where you are, and that's that regional understanding that we have in healthcare. But you're standing at your door and looking out, and it's sunshine, and that's the individual level data that isn't giving access to AI to train on specifically yet. I think once we get to the regulatory place where each of us as individuals find it very easy to self-custody our health data and to participate in marketplaces, then we'll start to look a little bit like Denmark. Denmark has done this already in the tune of 6 million people in their population. Denmark had very detailed data about its population up until 2020. It trained an AI model using data up till 2016 and then just asked it to report on survivability for the next 4 years and found that the model was exquisitely tight. However, we as individuals here across the globe, we can't all adopt Denmark's model. We'll need a different data structure to make it safe and secure for us to participate in ways that ensure that industry, government, researchers have access to pre-licensed data, but not carte blanche to all of our information at all times.
Following up on that, it's interesting because if you could own your data and monetize your data, obviously there's privacy concerns there, but if there was a way to do it, is that the future where we all own our data and are able to trade it like a Bitcoin, or is that
or like a stock?
Yep.
Some of us have more interesting health journeys than others, and so some of us have deeper medical records, genomic records. It should be something that it's at the level of the individual, hopefully, because I think most of us would participate. So, who doesn't want better health?
I was talking to a few professors who had received a grant, and they were very excited. And the grant was not money, but they received compute power for their AI model, and they were super excited about that. I thought that's really interesting. Like that's the future of what's enabling some of this cutting edge science. But to that point, what are the limitations? Are we talking about data centers, energy, power, money? Like how do we think about this?
Well, I think Dan should talk a little. Dan is probably one of the most privileged people in the world because he has access to some of the 2 or 3 generations that had supercomputers to solve some of these. He has access to the biggest cluster of biocomputing in the world. So maybe he should comment on how powerful, how wonderful it is.
Yeah, I appreciate you using the word privilege, Jason. Sometimes people use the word spoiled, which is maybe more accurate. Yeah, we're definitely spoiled here. One of the areas where the Department of Energy, which is what runs the national labs, is that we run the supercomputers for the country, and so we've been turning them a lot to bio problems, which I think is a great thing, obviously. I think one of the interesting aspects that we have to look out for is that, similar with these large language models, they're incredibly compute intensive. And so now that some of these bio applications have clear commercial value, we want to avoid a scenario where, all the therapeutics, for example, are being developed by a small number of giant players in the field. So the professors that you just mentioned getting access to compute, that's very enabling for them. It's still probably, I'm guessing, tiny compared to what the giants are using. And that's where a lot of the progress is happening. I'll add about the data that Jason was just talking about. I think that's the kind of regime change that's needed to get further advancement, kind of right of discovery. The way where I work in is all about discovery and design, and that's where there's been a lot of progress, because there's a lot of data, and it's very molecular, so we can use knowledge and physics-based approaches together with data, and there's ways of generating huge amounts of data. Not so when it comes to other levels of biology. There's only so many clinical trial data points that we have. There's only so many medical records that a given model have access to today. If you industrialize that and make that much broader, that's the kind of level of data that could make a bigger dent on the more complicated biology questions.
Yeah, let me just give two quick vignettes from your world. One is, if you heard about fusion that happened at Livermore, that would not have happened without the supercomputing capability they have there. That progress and that getting to fusion required the world's biggest supercomputers every 2 to 3 years. And then the second thing that's one of my favorite stories is during COVID, we're using the big machines to design molecules, and the amount of compute power that was being applied to those problems dimmed the lights of Livermore, California. So that's the scale of that's really, bio problems are really the last frontier in terms of computing. It's not physics, it's bio. Bio is a lot harder than physics.
I would echo that. And, we're reminded by Steve Jobs and Kate Middleton and other high-profile individuals that we continue to kind of walk blindly into adverse health outcomes without any knowledge that they're happening. And our industry used to think everybody was basically well until they were ill. And these types of episodes are really showing us that that's not the case at all. And our level of intelligence is far too low in order to protect each other from these types of devastating outcomes. Imagine a future in which we could be warned in time to make a difference, because certainly we have the numbers. We have 60,000 people a year in the US with pancreatic cancer and many more without pancreatic cancer. If there was a fire hose of truth, if there was good access to lived experiences of each of those populations, the AI that Dan and Jason are talking about would have no trouble sorting out what are the clusters of co-occurrences that are putting us at risk at any particular time, and allow us to actually move forward with deliberation to see the future in ways in which we could adjust our lives accordingly in time to make a difference.
All right, let's switch gears here a little bit and get into something that you mentioned earlier, which was just this idea of the blockchain, how that could Venn diagram overlap into what we're talking here from an in silico drug development process? Like, how do you guys see? I'd love to hear you kind of think about if you're even talking about blockchain, if it's relevant to what you're doing today, or if that's something that is a green shoot for potential opportunity.
Well, I think go ahead, Sergeant.
No, I was gonna say I'll have Jason go first.
Oh, okay. My company is we're blockchain native. I think it's one of the most alongside AI. I think it's absolutely transformative of how we do business. We use it as a distributed ledger. So we use it as an immutable ledger. As we develop drugs on our platform, we have literally thousands of different files come together, and we have to extract knowledge from there, write reports to whether the FDA or to investors or to other people that are going to design the next step. And what we use blockchain to do is to keep track of all of those data transactions, all of those vendor transactions, all of the transactions that occur. In the same way that the major banks are using blockchain for settlement, payment processing, and what we found is that we can eliminate. One is we've really built what we think is a zero trust environment for drug development. We can address areas of transcription errors. They don't happen on our platform. It holds investigators accountable for the data they provide. We obviously can start from raw data, but people use different types of data, and we hold an immutable ledger of where this data came from. But then on the other side, for the FDA, for the auditors, you have a continuous real time ledger, and so it's not about it. You save months and millions of dollars in this drug development. And at the end of the day, drug development, Jim, Jordan, is time is the killer, right? And so we say in the end we can save a ton of time, improve the quality of the drug product that's coming out in the end, reduce the number of hands that touch it, and now create that ledger that you can, in some ways, it's like a medical record for a drug. How did we get here? Where are all the raw files? Where are all the numbers? Who made what decision? So it's absolutely a transformative technology. And then that sets the stage. That's the foundation for us to think about drugs not as a bottle of pills, but really as a real world asset or a new digital asset class. And once we have that, then we think that it'll drive market liquidity in a way that will be stunned.
Fascinating. Daniel, I'm assuming blockchain is super useful and you're on it every day, or not yet?
Yeah, we're deep in the weeds of the molecular design part, and we don't really handle any of the commercial applications. I would defer completely to Jason on the blockchain aspect of this, just like he defers to me on the geeky AI part.
By the way, that's the best cocktail hour you'll have is with Dan and talking about the future of AI. You won't be disappointed.
So Brigitte, what about you? Blockchain in the office?
Yes, so blockchain is what I talk about, of course, in the book Wealth Care, and use it specifically as a mechanism by which we can enable a 3-zone model, where zone 1 is home base. That's where as Jason talked about, you have the longitudinal data that describe your life over time, a safe and secure place for you to keep that minutia. On top of that sits zone 2, which is a continuous correlation AI. So non-rivalrous in every way, no IP there, just allowing you to have access to what's correlated with what, if that's of interest to you. And then zone 3 is that commercial zone. So industry, governments, researchers that are interested in insights, but never have access all the way down to the individual, Jason, Dan, or Jordan. They just have access to those pre-approved insights as served up from zone 2. And so it talks about using the blockchain and Web3 as a universal tool that's trans-global by design that allows for us to protect each individual on the planet in a similar way, regardless of which geography they find themselves under. And we see that this is very much a different, call it data structure, different data practice than is the current model. But I think if healthcare wants to really reap the true value or the full value out of AI, we'll have to enable this world where lived experiences through the 3-zone model become available by default to government, industry, and researchers in ways that are very seamless and have less of the friction that we have currently. And that way, if industry has access to lived experiences, we'll have a future whereby AI models might even have to report how much lived experience they actually trained on. Because, of course, synthetic data, third-party data, other sources of data can always make it hard and problematic to get the types of results we're looking for. But true lived experience will go a long way. And using the tools of blockchain Web3, we can certify your individual lived experiences in ways that allow them to be used robustly to train AI models.
Just a quick reminder for folks that are joining, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat below. One question that came in, and I think this is segue into one of my next questions, was, let's talk about the intersection or the Venn diagram of the Internet of Things, blockchain, AI, then I'm going to throw in ChatGPT and, crypto, coins. How does this all come together in the context of healthcare first, and then in the bigger macro picture? Because I think it's starting to intersect. I'm not sure if it's fully overlapping, but I want to hear from the experts.
No, I can jump in. I think the beauty of where we are today from a technology perspective is we used to, in healthcare, we just ignored the health piece of it because we had pathology for us. There's a lot of overlap there. So we can use our old tools to study and digest pathology. But here, I mean, we're talking about 8 million people on the planet that are all doing health differently. And with tokenization, it's possible to have gaming models teach us how best to incentivize individuals on the individual and local level to participate in the co-creation of health intelligence. And that's something we never had before. We used to use apps and wearables and ask people to use them for, quote, their own health. That was such a low value proposition that very few people participated. But now with the advent of these tools, we can tokenize participation in ways that incentivize people to continue to see value, not just in their own health data for their own, data bank, but really as an economic asset. As AI continues to impact our employment, perhaps there's a future not in the far future where we are actually acting as the deliberately creating data for AI training, that the biological units are the resources that AI needs, not just to ensure the products and services that are developed are effective, but also to help ensure we have AI alignment into perpetuity.
Yeah, I think there's some, the IoT question is an interesting one. One of the major, what's currently undergoing is increasingly we're monitoring health, we're monitoring research. So how a test in a lab performs entirely digitally. Before I would look through a microscope and draw a picture, right? And then maybe type it into the computer, right? those days are over, right? We monitor. We have, we basically think about it as sensing, right? So we sense health, whether research or in the sense of healthcare, digitally. And so that opens up the opportunity for these data, for those results to be born as an NFT or tokenized at birth, right? As the data is captured, it's really can be tokenized on the instrument. And then from there, whether it's contributing to a diagnosis or being used for research, that's the beautiful thing about blockchain is now you have this NFT that can be bought and sold or applied, or maybe the patient doesn't give permission to use it. It stays encrypted. Very, very powerful concept of that decentralized distributed architecture, moving away from our current kind of vertically integrated health system, vertically integrated drug development, drug discovery, drug development industry. That's the foundation for us to start to decentralize and distribute the know-how. And I think Brigitte was alluding to it. But you're going to make a lot of data. No human can make sense of all that. And that's AI, right? AI lets us explore data sets that are way beyond the capabilities of the best human. No human can keep up with that sort of thing. And that'll obviously become very, very, very important. And then at the end of the day, whether it's healthcare or you're making a drug, it's based upon knowledge. And what AI does is it gives experts better knowledge, better knowledge to make decisions. And that's based upon better data, better models. And so they all actually, we can lump them into their own buckets, and there's different sectors driving it, but healthcare may be one of the sectors that needs all of them, all the above together to transform itself. When you think about healthcare being, or life's, 25% of GDP, 22% of GDP, I think technology has to be the way we're going to get better health for less dollars.
So are you saying that we can just go into ChatGPT and put in our symptoms and we'll immediately spit
We're
out?
not far off, honestly. It's kind of funny a little bit, but the more sophisticated, when you put these language models like ChatGPT in the context of a proper software stack, and you can kind of control the wildness of it and harness the power, using language models, reasoning engines for diagnosis all day long.
No, I mean, you hear about these stories of, the father parent who goes in, mother, rare disease, types into the, and it spits out something that one doctor might not have thought of because it didn't scan 9 million data points. And
exactly,
it's wild.
But like, if you think about that instance you just talked about, which is kind of groundbreaking, it's so much better than the other systems we've had. But now once you start using reasoning logic to do diagnosis, you're going to laugh at how poorly the language models performed. Reasoning logic is so much more powerful, and like OpenAI is, knows that, their per token charge is probably 10x what they charge for language models. So they know the power, how much better the knowledge these things are producing.
And they'll be even better once they know us to the tune of a few thousand parameters. I mean, future generations will look at us and think, oh my gosh, your physician knew you with 10 parameters, your age, your gender, your occupation, and a few other parameters. Whereas AI can understand us to the tune of thousands of parameters, which will make it much more effective to us personally. I talk about it quickly in a short post on my LinkedIn where I look at GLP-1 use, which is becoming very popular. Almost 12% of the US population are using Ozempic and Ozempic-like medications. And yet there are some opportunities for adverse health outcomes that this new model would really allow us to have access to just those correlations. We are not looking for causation or a recommendation engine. We the people would like to be able to see how things are actually, affecting the population that's using it in time for us to make personal decisions ourselves.
So I know like when in the old days I used to go to the internet and type in, an ailment, it would just say cancer, right? It was never a great technical tool, or see your doctor. It sounds like we're getting more accurate. We're going to get more data, more information more accurately. And do we just have to trust AIs, right? And never question it? Like, how's this going to work in the future? Are we going to just believe the internet, and do we know to trust it?
Well, my kids would argue that that's the path to success. If it happened on TikTok, it's absolutely real, right? I think it's a little bit of a hybrid answer, right? We for a long time have used adversarial networks to improve the quality. There are strategies around adversarial language models or chat GPTs, whatever you want to call them, right? So there is a technical path to improving the accuracy and challenging the results. So you have, these more sophisticated model stacks where, a language model produces a result, and then you have another language model say, validate whether that came to be. At the end of the day, though, it's still a human expert business. And you can just on our platform, we don't think about it as just a single answer coming up. We think about it more as a user having a kind of a professional dialogue, a colleague level dialogue with our AI assistant. And you ask questions, you say, I don't believe that, these different things. And you have these interactions with a kind of a virtual colleague. And at some point you will develop truth. But I think it's a lot of test, verify. Ultimately, you have to have a human in charge to make these it's life or death decisions. It's multi-billion-dollar decisions. If you're, when I think a lot about this is, if you think about, AI serving up the wrong ad when you're on the internet, that's a low consequence decision. Who cares if you lose a thousandth of a penny? It happens. Who cares, right? You think about a medium consequence decision. The self-driving car crashes, right? You think about a high consequence decision where a physician kills someone because of an AI decision. And that's really why healthcare has been slow, is because we're in this high consequence world where the AI has to be accurate. Humans have to know how to work with the AI, how to challenge the AI. And, it's something that the 20s and 30-year-olds have figured out. But it's got to come, just because it's slow because of the fact that it's a high consequence decision that we're working with.
Yeah, and I think that's why at this point we're looking at correlations, not at answers. Bring these correlations to the attention of your experts and have them consider whether this makes sense or not in your particular case.
Yeah. So when I think about, just go back, because I think when I think of AI and I think of healthcare, the Venn diagram to me overlaps in silico, right? So I think earlier on, I used to think about radiologists and just having AI, read thousands of x-rays and look for, single points of data and using algorithms to figure out something that maybe the human eye couldn't see, or just process more data faster. Then you go into what would be, like a video scope, right? Where you're using AI and you're processing live time video versus a still static image. And now you think of, for the group, maybe I'll have someone just explain in silico for those who aren't used to it, understand the term. But let's talk about where we are from a in silico molecule drug discovery process and what that's going to mean and how that translates into the future of medicine. Because I think that really is fascinating, but also I'd love to understand the accuracy of that and if it's actually really working, and are we creating more drugs because of it? And is it just the magic wand that we need, or is there a lot more behind the next steps?
Well, I think it's about if you look at each of the industrial revolutions, it's really a matter of increasing precision and smaller scale. We keep kind of going down in scale, going down in precision, going up in precision. I think the same holds true for what we're going to do around drug discovery. The major pharmas, because of the cost and risk, they're looking at molecules that meet a 2 billion a year peak sales. That's a pretty high hurdle, and that's a lot of people you need to treat. But we all know that if you're an American at NIH, you'll say there's 10,000 diseases. 9,000 of those are rare diseases, right? Which won't even come close to the 2 billion a year peak sales hurdle. If you're a German, you're going to say there's 75,000 diseases. If you're an academic, you're going to say there's an order several million diseases, right? Most of those are druggable. Now, could we make 2 million drugs? Probably not. But I think that, we're going to go to smaller patients, smaller patient pools, more accurate patient pools. Like a single drug isn't going to treat one disease anymore. You're going to have 5 or 10 versions of drug just to treat one disease because of the variability that we have. I suspect that the era of the $2 billion drug is going to be increasingly rare. And we're going to see an era of kind of mass customization at smaller scale. And so that's the power of AI, is that it can reduce the risks, increase the success for these much, much more smaller, tailored medications. Now that's forward-looking 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. We're not there yet. But that's the direction we're going to have to go. We just can't keep chasing blockbusters and treating a few of us, right?
And does the blockchain fit into this at all? How does the blockchain layer on this?
So yeah, absolutely. The blockchain is critical to this, right? Whether it's getting the medical records for these smaller and smaller patient populations and being able to design molecules for the patient. The second place that the blockchain is amazing is thinking about, rather than a patient finding a drug, the drug finds the patient. You have a disease, your physician may not be aware of it, but when your medical record shows up on the blockchain, that molecule can come find you and say, "Hey, I might be able to help you." It's a possibility with blockchain. These sorts of things are technologies now, and they're just more about the social engineering of making that possible.
And I guess the last piece, I'll add this to the whole group, but who benefits from this? Like, where's the economy that builds around this amazing? We've talked about a massive TAM, right? World. So how do you monetize it? Is this free? Is this like a service that everyone should get as a human, or do we have to pay for this? And is this a data center that's going to benefit? Is this an algorithm? Help me understand the math behind this.
Well, I think the Nasdaq is kind of the perfect example. The free market grows industries, solves problems, right? So I'm a capitalist at heart. I think we have to pay for it. I think it drives innovation, and winners should be rewarded. And the blockchain really opens that up. It democratizes it. It opens markets. It's really a market opening effect. And I think anytime you open a market, you transform an industry. When these closed industries never do well long term, open markets do phenomenally well. And so, we're going to pay for it. I think 10% of my income, 15% of my income to my health is probably worth it. I'm okay with paying that, right? So I think we'll all pay for it. How we make it accessible to everyone, that's probably another discussion. But the technology will really enable this opening of the field, and the market forces will drive success.
And I think to answer your question, Jordan, we're seeing now that companies are building value first, and the business model is kind of on the heels of demonstrating value. And one of the companies that I think of is Waze. You know, Waze provides us with individual specific health intelligence today. It's using all the drivers on the road. We don't know who those drivers are, where they're going, what car they're driving. None of that information. But yet, by having all of these participants driving on the road, we get the individually specific intelligence that we need to make the right decision for our travel at any particular time. And that's the type of value we can start to produce with individuals digitizing their lived experiences in such a way that the technology allows them to be safe and secure, keep a hold of their privacy while sharing that lived experience across a larger group.
I mean, if I can add to all that, I mean, I think this discussion is right on, and I think there's a need for more innovation here, as far as I can see. I think that, as you said, the AI models are now incredibly capable, but the availability of the data needed to realize everything that's been talked about today isn't there. I like to think of the analogy of biosurveillance for the country or the world, right? There's models have been available that can ingest all of the data on from various local and regional areas to try to accelerate early warning of outbreaks or a novel biological threat or whatnot. We've never really been able to do that because we could not get past the let's share this data. Everybody would benefit from it, like we're saying here, but that data was never made available. Now, it's possible that the prospect of what's possible now with therapeutics and just everything that the more modern AI is bringing to the table would sort of change the equation there, and would it incentivize some of the stuff we're talking about here to allow the data to be made more available in some way that has never existed before. I would say that on top of that, there's a challenge, in contrast to Waze and a radiologist looking at, those images. Those are problems where with just that data, you could build a model that's informative. The stuff we're talking about here is bringing, electronic medical record data, Internet of Things data, clinical trial data from all sorts of other places where they aren't connected. Those dots have to be connected for the models to be able to actually leverage that data to answer these much more complicated biological questions. I have not seen an innovative proposal to make that happen, and that's not an AI innovation need. I think that's more of what we're talking about here.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think the blockchain tokenization of data and then tokenization of knowledge. That's really the missing part of what Dan was talking about, feeding these AI models data.
So the data is the differentiator.
Data is a differentiator, yeah, and how we access it, whether it's in these big, massive data sets, controlled by big companies, or do we have it controlled at the individual level or even at the instrument level if it's research? I think that's the power of blockchain, to really tokenize this data at the smallest possible level, have it paid, transacted, feed the models, have the knowledge paid, all this sort of thing. That's really the power of blockchain, to kind of connect and feed the AI models in a secure, safe, permissioned way.
Excellent. So we're getting down to the final minutes here. I know there were so many great questions that were submitted, so thank you for all the participants who submitted questions. We didn't answer a question. I'm going to talk to the team and see if there's a way that we can maybe answer them and offline, maybe with some FAQs or something up. But there's a lot of good questions that may actually end up becoming rolled into the next conversation we have. I know there were some folks that wanted to say some parting words, but as we get closer, I'll give every panelist kind of a minute or 45 seconds to say their final recap. If there's anything that you want to flag that you thought was important that we didn't cover.
Well, I think, just, thinking about, biology, Vijay Pandey from A16Z, which is a big venture capital firm in California, he once wrote that the problem with the biology is that it's, the number of degrees of freedom is a problem we've never been able to conquer from a technology perspective. It's just too complex. And that's why we need that stack, AI, blockchain, Web3, to really tackle the complexity, the diversity, the volume of data. And kind of to your point earlier, Jordan, the TAM right now is probably 1.6 trillion globally. That's, I think, a massive underestimate of really what it is. And so, health and wellness through technology, that's the new frontier. And that's where the markets will really drive the new technology, the solutions that we're after.
Yeah, and if we're talking A16Z, they put out a paper a while back talking about the biggest company in the world being a healthcare company. And I think that speaks to exactly what my colleagues are talking about on this call, where this isn't going to be easy, but the opportunity is huge. If we can get to the future where the masses participate in terms of producing digitized lived experiences that then can be certified on blockchain and delivered through pre-licensed arrangements to researchers and governments, industry at large, we have an amazing revolution of health at our disposal. And so I think that's a huge opportunity. As my colleague said, it won't be easy. It'll take a number of these types of discussions with experts from a wide range of healthcare expertise to pull together the trust framework that really pays off at the end of the day. Go for it, Dan.
Yeah, I'll just add that. I mean, I'm incredibly excited about all of these technologies for the future. I've been blown away by things that we thought were imminent and just never seemed to come, and things that we thought were 10 years away that just came all of a sudden. I think about it, ChatGPT was kind of all of a sudden, AlphaFold was kind of all of a sudden. And the key ingredients came together to make those happen. I think one of the ones that I think we can see happening, we're in the middle of right now, is that molecular design. That's one that we see is happening. It's incredibly exciting. It'll open up the doors for therapeutics that we haven't been able to make before. And that's incredibly exciting. I think the stuff that we talked about here is one of those areas where it depends on so many things that it's very hard to see where it's going to go in the future. But it's very clear that it's exciting and that there's a huge number of possibilities.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate all of your time and for the panelists joining. I found this immensely helpful, but also super interesting because it made me think a little differently about some of the bigger topics. So thank you. I believe we have one more person joining to kind of do some
Jordan, thanks for that.
housekeeping. Oh, is that you, Jimmy? Okay.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just want to personally thank you, Jordan, Brigitte, John, Dan. Fantastic discussion today. A little glimpse into the future of where we may be heading or are heading with AI, blockchain, and life science healthcare. So I want to thank you all, everybody. Thanks for participating today. We did send out a survey. If everyone complete the survey, we'd love your feedback. It's very helpful in moving forward. So everyone, thank you so much. Great conversation. Look forward to seeing you again, everybody. Thank you, everybody.